All right. Look, I'm really happy to see this woman because I listen to her podcast. I follow her on Instagram. If you're not following her, it's at Killer Psychologist. Is that your handle, Dana? Is it at Killer Psychologist or at Psychology Doctor? Go find her. It's Killer Psychologist. You'll find her on Instagram. She's on TikTok. I think she's on Twitter too. It's a fascinating podcast. She's a forensic psychologist. It's Dana Anderson. She's been on Nancy Grace. She's interviewed Aphrodite Jones. She's been on Discovery, Investigation Discovery, which is a channel that I was addicted to like 6 years ago. Like that's all I watched at night with these crime and murder shows. And she's a forensic psychologist. Like I said, she interviews criminals and murderers, and I'm very happy to have her here. So I'm done yapping. Dana, tell us what you do in your own words and how interesting it is.
Wow, you just made me sound so cool.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I'm a forensic psychologist and I don't do any therapy or regular psychology, I would say. I like the twisted stuff. And so the basis of my work would be I'm a court appointed expert. So I take a lot of criminal cases. And so I evaluate defendants in custody. That's my current role for competency to stand trial, insanity, sentencing, sex offenders, uh, any number of legal questions that could come my way. For county agencies, I evaluate high risk families in CPS that are, parental termination evaluations, things like that, family law, child custody, and then civil law. I do civil lawsuits, and that covers a lot. And there's I have 16 open cases right now this
Oh
month.
my God.
That's I've been in business 2 years, so I just celebrated that I'm 2 years old.
Oh, congratulations. You're you're
So
you're now walking. You're walking and you're talking. That's good. Okay.
yeah,
Well, just so we have this clear, for veterans of this podcast and for people that are new to this podcast, we did have a forensic psychologist as a co-host of this podcast for a very long time, Suzanne, but we never really actually got into the specifics of what she did. So that's why I sort of wanted you to kind of fill in that gap of what she was doing. Tell us, because I'm a forensic psychiatrist, right? So I do similar things to what you do, and most of the stuff I do is civil, guardianships, trusts, things like that. What is it that you do that's different from an evaluation standpoint than what I would do?
well, it's a great question. And I think that most people don't know the difference between a psychiatrist and psychologist. And I spent so much time explaining it to patients every day in the psych hospital because there was the psychiatrist and the psychologist, and the
Mm-hmm.
patients wouldn't have a clue, but I made sure I explained what I did and didn't, and I didn't misrepresent my role, and then I explained what the psychiatrist would do. And I would say they're going to evaluate your medications, and I'm going to do your intake. And you don't do a lot of psych testing in the psych hospital, but typically that's the role of a psychologist. A great partnership is having a psychiatrist and a psychologist work together. So you're
I think that's great, and actually from a civil standpoint, that's even better because a lot of times I'd get a civil request and you have to explain to the attorneys why you need a psychologist on top of a psychiatrist because evaluate, I can't test for dementia, for instance. I can do a mini mental status exam or a mini cog, but
really
those are screening tests.
okay. Let
Um,
me give you a question. I got assigned to a civil case. It's a big civil case against a school district of prior childhood sexual abuse. So lots of victims coming forward, and I'm assessing these victims. So I do a full psychopathology assessment test to see, I'm not just testing for PTSD.
Right.
You can find a lot of other things. So the opposing counsel hired a psychiatrist to evaluate the plaintiff. Okay. And did a testing. It was the MMPI, and they concluded, the psychiatrist did the test and concluded that the plaintiff was malingering and turned in his report. Okay. And so then I do my eval, and I was like, wow, that was a quick conclusion. But I said, I don't even know if he's understands how these tests work,
Right.
because, and I actually got to pose twice on this case, 6.5 hours, I think, each time. But I was not trying to disparage the other evaluator, but I had to explain to the attorneys that he incorrectly concluded the results. He misinterpreted them. So I had to explain the interpretation.
Why would a psychiatrist be doing an MMPI?
Well,
it's not that they can't. It's not that they can't, but I would never do that. And it's because I was never trained to interpret an MMPI as a psychologist would have been trained to do it. And so why would I take the risk of going in front of a judge and try and defend my ability to understand the statistical analysis necessary to do that? Because it's more than just getting a result. You have to understand what those results mean. And psychiatrists are not trained that way, whereas psychologists are trained to interpret those results. So when lawyers depose you or put you on the stand, the first thing they would ask you is, are you trained to do these things? Psychiatry training is really not fully trained for that. It's interesting to me that they would do that. Now, it's not that we can't do it. We can administer them, but being able to defend those results. Again, if a psychologist does it and they give us those results, we can comment on them, but being able to interpret them, that's something else. I would be very remiss to be the guy that would administer it and interpret it. Again, that's exactly why we have people like you, forensic psychologists. Now, having said all of that, I have done a SIRS, for instance. I keep forgetting what the SIRS stands for. The something inventory of reported symptoms. It's a malingering test.
Malingering.
And as a forensic psychiatrist, I have been trained on that, and I would be able to do that and interpret that. But that's because I've been specifically trained as a forensic psychiatrist. Go ahead.
Yeah, and malingering is, it's a term, just in case to explain what it is. And I remember explaining this on the stand because they're like saying, well, malingering is lying. And I said, no. It's, intentionally like feigning psychological symptoms for secondary gain.
Correct.
Like it's specific. So I said intentional. No, right?
Right.
I don't believe this person is intending. They actually do have a significant number of problems that's taking on the form of a number of diagnoses. She's actually psychotic also. So it's going to elevate certain scales, but it doesn't mean someone's not experiencing those because they exceeded cutoff scales. He gave another test. It was this trauma symptom inventory and said her symptoms exceeded, so therefore no trauma. And I had this great research article about how that's just not, You can't just say, oh, the cutoff score out of 136 questions is 15. And if you had more than that, then it couldn't be true. Like you couldn't have had, been molested, gone to war, like been abused, like domestic violence. Like some people have an unusual amount of trauma, right? It's complex. PTSD can look like a lot of different symptoms, but
I've heard this before, this complex trauma. I keep being beaten over the head with this because my wife does trauma therapy, and I keep being told that this is a thing. It's not in the DSM-5 yet, complex trauma. Can you give me an idea of what I'm missing here, of what complex trauma is?
I think we're going to see it in the future DSMs. And we're kind of overlooking it. So, for example, sometimes I see people and they've just had a life of tragedies where they've also disassociated, had some psychosis, they're fearful, they're paranoid, they can't sleep. They're depressed, they're binge eating, there's all these different symptoms. So I could give you 6 different diagnoses. Why do you have insomnia? Why do you have these things? And so sometimes it can be rooted in trauma. Like, why are you disassociating or have some psychotic features or paranoid personality? Well, what if you experienced a lot of, drive-by shootings, or your paranoia was rooted in reality, not psych.
Right.
So it is important to really understand someone's past trauma. And I've seen some people get misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, but it's like you could meet the criteria for one disorder, but that doesn't mean that that's the right diagnosis for you.
You get a lot of them. You said you have 16 open cases now. Of the cases that you've had, what is the one case, if you can narrow it down to one case, that creeped you out the most? If you can narrow it down.
Wow, there's so many good creepers. I mean, what category do we want to go in? We want to go with like
Let's go with
creepy Freddy Krueger serenades, like sexual weird stuff.
Let's go with like slasher kind of killer guys. Like
Slasher killer. Like
yeah.
Okay. Well, I saw this man at a state hospital, and he had killed his roommate. And I was there to evaluate him for readiness for release. That doesn't mean you're going to be released from the state hospital, but if your legal defense was not guilty by reason of insanity, and it's just part of the process for the state hospital. If a psychologist comes in and evaluates your risk, they could have been in the state hospital for 10 years, and I'm assessing, these people have all killed at least one person. So I just go in there with an open mind. Like, I mean, we don't always need to get right into the crime, but hey, tell me what happened. And I remember he had some paranoia about her coming home, and maybe thought she was reaching in her purse to grab something or something. So he's so I said, well, then what did you do? So I always like to ask, what did you do? Or what were you thinking? And he strangled her. And then he realized he killed her. And then I said, well, what were you thinking? And then he said, he looked out, he opened the window and he cried out to the street. He said, I am no murder. I am no murder. And then I said, so then what did you do? And he said, like, that he got a saw. And then, so he's walking me through, like, he had to get rid of the body and he had to cut it up, all the limbs and everything. And he ended up dismembering it and then driving around and putting it in different dumpsters. And so,
as one would.
yeah, I mean, so he was taking out the trash, but he drove around and then he got caught and then he rode with police and he had to remember all the dumpsters he put them in.
Was there ever a guy that you walked out of and you're like, wow, this guy scares me. I'm afraid of this one.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, more than one for sure. There was one guy, he raped this elderly woman, but then he chopped her up into little pieces and he got off on cocaine-induced psychosis and then he went to prison. Well, he got off on, I think he went to the state hospital. He conned his way. No, he just conned his way out of situations. I think he got at least two different psychologists pregnant. Um, he was just so high in psychopathy, and but he was so like scary and threatening. I had to give him a drug test because his clinician was out, and he anyway, it's like he interrupted me talking to someone, one of my clients who had schizophrenia. We were having a conversation. He just butted in, was going to interrupt in front of everyone, like 20 other guys. And I said, I'm talking. Like, I will finish. Like, I'm not going to have him bully me because then it's
Right.
his face turned so red and he clisped and he was just like, he was pacing around me and all this is happening. And I was just ignoring him. And then I end up debriefing with all the guys. They're all like parolees, like they're how they assess that situation and how it made them feel. Because a lot of them were severely mentally ill and they're scared. And he bullied them and would steal from them and all this stuff. But the crazy part about dangerous people like that is his clinician, when she got back, she like said, oh, he came back and he's crying and you hurt his feelings and like all. And I was an intern at the time and I was like, bitch, please, do you even like, so he was manipulating her. When you look at dangerous people, like they're manipulating these professionals and then he's just a rapist slash murderer in the community. Right. And going legally into your home, pretending to be an electrician. And so it's so horrifying for me that some of these people in positions of power, like they need their ego to be fueled. Like it's harder for me to go up against someone like that because trust me, he made a big deal about it and was threatening to me. And it was, that's a lot harder to do. Like I got in trouble, right? He complained on me and he was yelling. He uprooted the whole like program that day.
Right. I wanted to talk about your last podcast. You talked about OJ. And what's interesting is you had a podcast about OJ, and I had a podcast about OJ around the same time. I think my wife would call that synchrony. But you had an interesting take on OJ, whereas I was talking about how OJ, whether he had traits of the Machiavellianism and the Dark Triad. You brought on one of your favorite guests, Jason Jensen, who's a PI, and you brought on another guy named Chris Todd, who I had never heard of before, but apparently he's also an investigator. And his theory is that OJ had an accomplice, right? So I listened to this podcast and I looked up Chris Todd, and he seems kind of like a guy that finds a murder that's really famous and gets an angle. And I don't know what your take on this is, but I listened to it and there's three things that came up that I thought were really interesting. He said that there was unidentified blood under Nicole's fingernails that it was extremely unlikely that one person could do that kind of damage to two bodies, and that there's some kind of videotape or audio tape that somebody has that he knows that you can get for like $45,000 a minute, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, it sounds very conspiracy to me. What do you think? Do you think that he had an accomplice, that there was another person there?
Well, I would also, what I would like people to approach this with critical thinking and an open mind. To the media doesn't always put everything out there, and there can be reasons for that. We did a second episode on this that goes a little deeper,
Right,
and
there's
he
two.
does, yeah, so he has the discovery file too, and then I also have the investigative report by Jason Jensen. So it's got the crime scene photos, the evidence, and everything. And so it's all very interesting of why some aspects of a case don't you don't really hear about some parts. But one of the things that I didn't know, and I'm not, how would I know, right? That I didn't realize OJ and Nicole they were using a lot of cocaine. And OJ was with that association of people that were supplying that. Nicole rang up a $15,000 cocaine bill. So there was a debt that they did come to collect. And OJ was pissed about that because at that point, that was his ex-wife, but they were going to OJ. OJ did supplied it to players and kind of fixed the games and was running schemes and like mob stuff. But like that association, like that involvement, that's the part that I don't think a lot of people know. And so the guy that was with him that night when they went over there, that was one of the guys, like his dealer, that right. And so there were two weapons, right? And then the other guy, Charlie, was the one that moved the Bronco and different. So there's a lot of details in there that we wouldn't know because they didn't come out at trial, but it made reasonable doubt that it was OJ, which makes sense now, right? Because there was another person there. And I think the question is, was he, so the question is, we know someone was there. That's why all the evidence was confusing. But is he an accomplice? Like, was he a participant, right? Which
Right.
there's some theories on that, and I want people to hear the evidence and then think. So if there's two weapons, two different wounds, two different people were participating in these stabbings. So, but then, and there's more information that comes out in the next episode, but like why this other guy didn't go down. And this other guy, Charlie, he was creating a movie script called Juiced that he's been working on, where all this stuff's coming out. Just, it's all in the script. So this Hollywood producer, investigative journalist like Chris Todd has got the script and was like, what? You're admitting all these things. Like, this is criminal. I'm a whistleblower. They shut the whole project down. I think because you still can be prosecuted for murder, right?
Right. There's no
Not
statute of limitations on murder. Correct.
so. I think so. You're like, well, why is this guy coming out with this tell-all story? But I think there's this invincibility aspect of like, and the reality is, LAPD is never going to reopen this case and prosecute. So because it's mob ties and stuff. It's just, we're done. And there's too many other people that played a role that they don't want to be brought up again. Like there was all kinds of hands in this. And people strongly encouraged not to share this story on the media. Like there was kickbacks. There's a lot of, it's very interesting. So I just think it's a fascinating like reveal of a lot of information that actually makes a lot more sense to me when you dive into it. And so these two people, Jason and Todd, both independently investigated it. And Chris Todd's working on it about 7 years. So he knows it way too well. And then so Jason Jensen did his own investigation. And then they approached me. I said, well, I'm open to hear anything, right? And so they both came on the show and talked about it. And the reality is this: there's a lot of people that get away with murder in the criminal justice system. I mean, and so I see that. And I think there should be awareness of that. I think we're aware now. I don't know why. I know there's some people that are like, oh, OJ's innocent or something like that. I'm like, okay, please.
Oh no, it's not that. It's clearly any reasonable person is going to say he did it. The question that I had about the accomplice thing is, if I'm his attorney and I'm being paid millions of dollars, obviously, to get him a not guilty verdict, and there is any evidence at all that there was another human being, forget participating in it, like holding a knife, that was at the scene, like in a car there, I bring that in to evidence at the trial, because that is reasonable doubt. And all you have to prove is reasonable doubt, or all you have to show is reasonable doubt as a defense attorney. And that was never brought in.
Well, I don't think OJ wants to reveal his mob connections, because I think at one point
OJ wants to get away. OJ wants to not go to jail. I don't think OJ cares, right?
No, because they were threatening to kill his kids he can't tell, or they're going to kill him or his kids. Like, so he can't. So I don't know that his attorney, I knew that some of this stuff, right? It's just cloudy enough with the crime scene to know it's
that sounds very conspiracy to me. And I'm not, look, I'm not saying that there's been enough conspiracies that have turned out to be true to say you can't say all conspiracies are not true, because there's been enough, right? And MK Ultra is one of the big ones that we know now have become true. But it's one of these things where it's like, well, this is now this OJ thing is another one of these where it's like, well, he's hiding mob ties, and the reason he can't bring the evidence in is the mob, and all of this evidence is now, I think the fingernail thing was shown that it was her blood was under her fingernails, and the rest of it was inconclusive. But the conclusion is, well, we don't know who's the blood, so there must have been someone else. It's just, I don't have a problem with asking questions. My issue with it is when you ask a question, you don't immediately jump to a next conclusion, right? Because as forensic doctors, right, our job is to ask the questions and get the facts, but then use the facts to get the conclusion. But if we don't have the facts, we can't jump to the conclusion, correct? And so if we get an information like the fingernail thing where, the blood type underneath was degraded and we can't really get it, that doesn't then mean that there's someone else there because we have degraded blood. So it's these little things that bother me about it. And again, he had mob ties. She had a
Well,
bill. Yeah. Okay.
OJ's interviews, he says Charlie Ehrlich was there. Like he that inter he this is in the script, this is written, there's recordings, like it's
But what is
he's
this?
done the
What is
interviews.
this? What is this tape that supposedly is this $45,000 tape? It was in
I
the
don't
second. It was in the second podcast. There's supposedly a tape that's really expensive.
I think what you're referring to is that the whole discovery file would be worth several $100,000. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've never
that's what
heard
it is.
45,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to have all the evidence and all of that, like if I just had that money and buy it and we could, um, so, people can buy the discovery file now and look at all the
Why hasn't
evidence,
anyone
but
bought it? Why hasn't anyone
well,
bought it though?
well, Chris Todd has it. You can call him and you can
Oh,
buy
he's
it.
selling it.
He's not
Chris is.
selling it. He just has it. He's telling you he has the discovery file and he has all this information that you
Okay. I
don't have.
misunderstood it. Okay.
And so he's just saying the media, if you really want to do the story, we can open it up and look at it.
Okay.
And
All right.
there's information in there it's much more complex. There's a lot of data. So he's revealing some of it because he's in, has done Hollywood movies and things. And I'm not sure what his role was to be in this movie called Juiced, but this was all going to come out. This version, Charlie was going to star in a movie and have this version, kind of like the way OJ wrote a book saying, like, if I did it, right?
If I did it, yeah.
So this is Charlie saying, coming out, I was there. This is our relationship. This is what we did. But then, second thought, decided to pull that and then maybe sue if anybody says anything of his involvement. And now Charlie's backtracking and saying a completely opposite story. So you can't have it both ways. So he's now saying OJ was innocent. Like he just, so that's just so strange. So obviously you can't just change your story. And so that's interesting, because even now after his death, you would think so you have to understand why Charlie can't fully come out now anymore. I think he was going to, then he realized, because I think, there could be motivation for money and fame and certain things that he could achieve from this, but then also, like, the reason why OJ got away with that, because he already was acquitted and he could write a book and there's double jeopardy. So, but this other guy, you don't have that protection. And so now and I think that's really interesting. So it's maybe not as a conspiracy as you think, but like, this is what happens in a lot of crimes. There's more than, we're going to cover Kurt Cobain's death. There's more than one person involved. It's not this.
And that's another one that has this kind of cloud of, did he commit suicide, or was, what's her name? God, I forgot her name.
Courtney Love.
Courtney Love, was she involved? Did she have him murdered because of the way the gun angle was pointed? He couldn't possibly have held a shotgun.
Yeah,
in that direction.
You don't shoot yourself with a shotgun, but
well, if that's what you have.
Well, that's bullshit. So come on, dude.
Come on.
Dude, it's so ridiculous. So
if that's what you have, Dana, that's what you use.
No.
Okay, well, could you preview that for us? Who do you have on that show?
Well, there's 4 witnesses that are kind of been in hiding, but they've come forward to investigators. They want to remain anonymous, but they are sharing what they know about the case. Obviously, there's multiple people involved, right? And when there's large amounts of money and, um, Courtney's involvement with this death. So I think there's going to be a lot to be revealed. So the people that are investigating it, so they'll be presenting a lot of forensic evidence, interviews, like the note, the alleged suicide note, and then the handwriting, and then handwriting after his death that was added to it, things like that are, again, critical thinking. Just think about it.
This is not new, by the way. I have heard all of these things about Kurt Cobain because I was a huge Nirvana fan when I was a teenager, and when he died, it was a big deal for me, and so everything that came out about his death since then I've been keeping up on. So these ideas about, like, I call them conspiracies, but all of these ideas that she was involved and had him killed, or was allegedly involved in his murder, supposedly, I've kept up on. So this is something that's interesting to me. It's never something I bought into because I don't see a reason for it. But
well, somebody filing for divorce, or you're going to lose everything or money, and that. So there's a whole thing. So I think people will underestimate who's capable of committing murder, or like people's motives. Like, there's a lot more people that get involved in these things, and they can rationalize why they do it, but they can get away with it. And it's interesting to dig up these cases and talk about. But when we go do the case, we're going to have investigators, part of the discovery file. They'll be presenting it on my show, and I'll get to hear it for the first time.
All right.
And it'll just give listeners an opportunity to think about this evidence, or right? Like, what does this mean? Like, presenting all this information. Yeah. Well, even if, what do we do with it, right?
Right? No, I'm looking forward to that because I'm interested in that. I wanted to show you this, and I wanted to ask you something because you interviewed Aphrodite Jones about why women are interested in men that are incarcerated, or strange men, and I wanted to know if you've ever seen this meme.
Oh no!
So I wanted to show you this.
What are you going to show me?
Have you seen this? And this is for the audio audience. It's a meme of a woman on a date. She's got a like a wine glass or something, and she's saying, "I'm attracted to bad boys. Are you a bad boy?" And there's a dog, and he's saying, "This isn't going to work out."
That dog looks nervous. That dog's like, this man, this,
It's sick. This isn't going to work out. So yeah, what was the conclusion between you and Aphrodite Jones as to why is it that women seem to be into these dudes in orange jumpsuits? Is there a reason? Like, I don't understand it. Like, what is it about? But I know there's a stereotype.
So a lot of my following is almost 90% women that follow me and are interested in the true crime genre, which I find interesting. So it is heavily predominated by women, so there is, statistically speaking, there are much more women interested in true crime shows. And one of the things we talk about is, because if you think, what is my interest with true crime? But I think I sought out watching shows of like how I could survive because as women, this is talking about women who watch true crime, not looking to date these guys, but uh, we're at high risk to be a victim of crime, right? So I want to know how to escape and survive. So my interest growing up and watching true crime, and I was raised on like Murder, She Wrote, Matlock, Heart
Mm-hmm.
to Heart, Magnum PI. Uh, Now, on the other hand, if you're talking about the women that date these psychopaths, right? I want to point out one thing back to the story I was telling you about the guy that chopped someone up, raped them, chopped them up, murdered them. Okay. Um, he was able to schmooze many people, impregnate psychologists, and go on, right? So women, and so not just women, but like if you need your ego stroked or you want someone to be interested in you or you want attention, guess who's the most likely going to give that to you?
A
Like,
psychopath.
yeah, or like, yeah, the narcissist, like they're doting on you, love bombing you. Like, think if I were to work in prison, like, um, if I wanted to get compliments, I could, but that doesn't mean what you think it means. Like, don't go to work and think don't be in a deficit of compliments. Like you need that to survive. So a lot of those people, the women could be vulnerable or have low self-esteem, or like they can be fancied by that attention. And then that's your first boundary violation. This is anatomy of a setup. But for a lot of women who aren't aware, they enjoy it, crave it, or want it, or it feels good. But
Well, let
it's
me get you out on this. All
bad.
right. You've got all these cases open. You get so many cases a month. If if you do have time, or if you could have time, what would you read if you could?
I have quite a few books that I would like to read. I've kind of set them aside. Aphrodite Jones sent me a book, and other people have sent me books, or like that I order and I want to read them, and I just would feel like I don't have the time right now. So Aphrodite Jones has one that I started, Levi's Eyes, and she's a captivating true crime writer, and that's a story about a guy who he gets away with murder. And then, well,
Spoiler alert.
that's kind of the first murder, but then there's another one, but then it goes on. Anyway, uh, well, it's a fascinating story. She shares it on my show when we talk about why women love true crime, and then she gives a dialogue of that whole story. So the devil is in the details. Like she's been communicating with him when he was in prison, and he was telling all the reasons why he did, and that's where it gets really interesting. So I would love to have time to just read and lay on the beach and just enjoy some of these stories, and then get to a place where maybe someday I could write a story or take someone, right? Like she's done, take someone's
Mhm.
story and write it, tell it in a way, as we do that, we work in forensics. I think we have an interesting perspective, but maybe someday I'll write a book.
All right. Awesome. Dana, thank you for coming on. Killer Psychologist Podcast. You can find her on what's your website? Psychologydoctor.com. Is that right?
Yeah, psychologydr.com. And you can just go on YouTube and look at Killer Psychologist. Our podcast videos are on there, or you can on Spotify, Killer Psychologist. And you can just interact with us and ask us questions or throw out names or cases you want us to explore. Or if you think you'd want to be a guest, like throw it out there.
All right. Well, Dana, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. This was great.
All right. Thank you, Dimitri.